Auguste Comte came along, and he invented the word sociology. He's known as the father of sociology. And he said, look, when we were hunting and gathering, we hopefully found enough food, but if God or fate or what have you didn't want to provide the food, so it was. As we settled and were agriculturalists, we could count on these universal laws, and that made sense for us. But now we need to move forward, and we've started to recognize that there are larger natural principles that we can test and verify and count on. And we need to, in fact, use that not only in our study of the physical world, but in our study of society. So sociology is the scientific study of human social lives and groups and how we interact and the larger social structures and institutions that keep society going. So Batman's job is to fight crime. But don't ask Batman why there is so much crime in Gotham. That's the job of sociologists. Now, in England, Harriet Martineau, she reads Comte and she says he's got some good ideas, but he needs revision. So she translated his work from French and edited his work, and in fact, he liked it so much that Comte used her translations in his own classes. And Martineau said, all right, how are we going to do this? She wrote the first book on research methods, how to observe morals and manners. And she said, it's not enough to just study the leaders of society. We have to study all aspects of human society, because it's only a small minority of people that are the wealthy, the leaders, the kings, etc. And for the most part, the people who keep society running are the lesser-known people, the lesser thought-about people, the workers, the women, the children, the minorities, etc. Much later, this term is invented by C. Wright Mills, sociological imagination, but it fits nicely into Martineau's basic principle. We have to look beyond these individual people's lives and events and see how they fit into the broader social history. We both are shaped by the world that we come up in, but we also shape that world. Society only exists as long as there are people creating it. The sociological imagination helps us see how private troubles relate to public issues. So take something like divorce, for instance. It's a private issue between two people. People break up because they don't love each other anymore. Maybe one cheats. Maybe they just got married too quickly and don't know each other that well. But that private issue seems to change over time and depending on the society. So why did divorce skyrocket in the period around World War II and shoot up to its highest point in the 90s before now coming down a bunch? Why are so many people making that very private decision together as a society so much more? It could have to do with changes in the cultural ideas of marriage. Do we think of marriage as being a lifelong commitment anymore? Do we, in fact, think of marriage as being a romantic relationship in a way that people didn't 150 years ago? Has the improved job prospects and rights of women allowed them to free themselves from bad marriages that they previously were stuck in, because otherwise they would be destitute? What is it about US and some other Western societies, cultures, that causes them to have such higher divorce rates even today than many other countries? You also have to ask, how does divorce then affect society? How does your private decision to get divorced affect your children and the next generation in general? For one example, we can see that single-parent families tend to have much bigger problems of poverty, which means in turn then, as we'll talk about much later in the term, more difficulty for those children to get ahead themselves, and also often more difficulty for the economy in general. Will those children, that next generation, know how to have a healthy relationship? So Herbert Spencer, he takes these basic ideas and he looks at society and he says, yes, biology had recently discovered that animals seem to evolve over time, and that part of the way that happened, a big part of the way that happened, is that the fittest animals seemed to survive as their environment changed. And so he said, as the human world, the physical and social world changed, societies had to evolve, and they would evolve just enough to stay healthy. And in that case, then, some societies and some people in society that didn't make it, well, that was okay, because that was better for society as a whole. He said society is like an animal. It's like a living body, with various people and social structures functioning like its organs to keep society functioning well. So he contributed to the first big macro, large-scale look at society, which is functionalism. So functionalism says each structure is like an organ and it performs functions for society. So each of us are the cells in a body. Our brain directs our actions just as the government directs society's actions. Our stomach converts raw materials from the world into usable parts and goods, which our stomach converts, the food that we eat into materials that we can use. The family reproduces society like our womb. And as such, just as animals have biological DNA that shapes each generation to be more or less like the previous generation, although allowing some change over time, our culture reproduces society from one generation to the next. And in such a system, sickness then you could see as dysfunction. So you're having heart failure. That might mean there's something wrong with the economy. And cancer cells, cells that aren't doing what they're supposed to do, those are people perhaps being deviant to society's laws and way of doing things. And in that case, we have to deal with those people. So functionalism generally sees something very stable. It changes slowly, just enough to adapt to its environment. And overall, although some people might have more than others, and some people might suffer, it works for everyone's benefit. Now, Karl Marx disagreed with that way of looking at society. He too took a macro-sociological view, looking down like from a Google satellite view at society as a whole, and he saw these big groups in society not cooperating like structures, like organs in a body, but competing with each other. These big groups competing for resources, and he saw economy and struggle over resources as the basis for human social history. And he said it started out with kings and nobles exploiting peasants, and now with capitalism, we had the owners of these factories and these machines exploiting the workers who worked in those factories for their own benefit. And this is the origin of conflict theory. Conflict theory is the basic idea that society is made up of groups of people competing over resources, competing for power, competing for well-being, and it's only as stable as the people on top holding that system in place for their own benefit. They use their power to suppress the people beneath them who would be fighting for change and for a better place for themselves. So in that case, society isn't so much stable as it is always on the brink of change. These macro-sociological perspectives, functionalism and conflict theory. Is society stable and working for everyone's benefit, or is society a constant power struggle between different groups? And we have different types of conflict theory. Marxist theory uses economics. Feminist theory sees gender as a major source of conflict, and critical race theory sees race and ethnicity as major sources of conflict as people compete for power. Now, Max Weber said Marx has some good ideas, but Marx is coming from a place of being pissed off. Marx is angry at the injustices he sees in the world, and he's not using a very scientific viewpoint. Weber says, we all have our own points of view and our own perspectives, and the job of a sociologist is to try and see things from other people's perspectives. He called it Verstehen, the German word, for a meaningful understanding of other people's points of view. And he's moving towards micro-sociology in this sense, looking at how individual people understand their world. And so he said, the Industrial Revolution and capitalism was spurred in part by cultural changes. Because as the Protestant Reformation pulled much of Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, away from Catholicism, they no longer had the Catholic Church as a guide for, who is a good Christian and how to be a good Christian. And so people started to say, well, if God blesses good people with earthly wealth, then by working hard and innovating, we can create wealth and we can prove that we are loved by God and that we are good people. And so it was that change in understanding that spurred much of the industrial capitalist way of life. Now, our first American sociologist and the last one in this lecture, W.E.B. Du Bois, he said, "This is great. We're learning so much about society, and in doing so, I'm seeing how myself as an African-American man in the United States, even being born just after slavery is abolished in the United States, I still see that Black Americans are struggling, and they're struggling because of the shape of the society that they're in." And so he said, we have to use that Verstehen, we have to understand society from the perspective of those with less power, of the minorities, of women. He said that understanding is crucial to combating prejudice, and that it's the lack of political rights that is in many ways holding Black Americans down. And so he helped to contribute to conflict theory, and he helped to push sociology towards the applied sociology of practical use in making the world a better place.